Welcome to the NPTEL course on environmental quality monitoring and assessment. My name is Ravi Krishna. I am from the Department of Chemical Engineering, the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. The background for this course is based on our need for doing environmental risk assessment, and typically we would like to do this risk assessment based on certain parameters. So, environmental pollution, typically we detect it by looking at health markers in the population of receptors. So, what we call as receptors is mainly human beings, and in some cases animals and other species, animals and plants in the environment, in our surroundings. As we see some deterioration in their health as an indication of some impairment of the environmental quality, and when we try to investigate what is the cause of this environmental impairment, we see where this pollutant is. This pollutant in this picture here, we are representing the pollutant by this letter A, and this could be in different phases of the environment such as air, water, soil, sediments, plants and animals. And we have some of these, we come in contact with some of these phases, and that is how there is a possibility of a health effect. The next question that we ask is how is this getting into the environment? Where does this A come into the environment? And to answer this question, we know that a lot of times the A comes from different types of sources that is present in the environment, and we would like to ask this question. We start with this question as to this is a general arrangement of pollutants. They come from a source into the environment and from the environment to a receptor. The health effects of the chemical pollutants present in the environment depends on the toxicology of these pollutants in different beings, in humans and in animals. And our interface with the pollutants is what we call as an exposure interface. So, we are exposed to chemicals from in the environment. When they come in contact with a receptor, we call this as exposure, and at the other end these are getting into the environment from different sources. That is, we call this as an emission level of this thing. So, in between, from an emission to the exposure, we look at what is called as fate and transport. So, this fate and transport essentially tries to address this question: what happens to a chemical once it is released into the environment and before it comes in contact with a particular receptor. And so, this the question of fate and transport is very important for in the context of risk assessment of environmental pollution, and this is this is a central theme of this course. We try to address different aspects of this particular question. So, the specific questions that we could ask in this context are: how much exposure is safe? There is always going to be some exposure of different constituents in the environment, but the question is whether this is safe, and that comes from toxicology. That the answer to that question comes from the toxicology of that particular chemical. The next question that we would like to ask is the exposure level. How much of exposure is happening actually, and this relates to the monitoring of pollutants in the environment. So, to answer this question, we need to measure how much pollutant exists in the environment and different constituents, components of the environment such as air, water, soil. And when we talk about exposure, we are talking about the air we breathe, how much air we breathe and how much water we drink and the food we eat, and the presence of these chemicals in these constituents. So, that is the exposure pathway, and the exposure level is the concentration of chemicals in each one of these things. And the third question we can ask is how does the chemical enter the environment, and it comes from emission from various sources, as we saw in the previous slide, and it travels within the environment, and this is the last question: what happens to it when it enters the environment? And different things can happen to it. It can just move from one place to another place based on certain physical rules. It can also undergo transformation through reaction or accumulation in different phases by various processes such as adsorption or absorption or any such reaction. So, the outline of the course is really in three sections. One is the introduction, where we define various components of what we are talking about. In the introduction, we took about the composition of the environment itself and the compartments and how we define it, and we also talk about the pollutants of concern and why we are concerned about it, and the criteria for pollution in terms of toxicology and the physicochemical properties of the chemicals and the standards that govern this. So, this forms the basis framework for risk assessment. So, this is the regulatory arm and the public view of what is there and how regulatory agencies can make a decision based on how to move forward in this aspect of risk assessment. And the next section deals with the measurement and monitoring of the environmental quality. So, here we specifically look at environmental quality parameters, what are the things that we are interested in analyzing in the environment, and the techniques for measuring these in the environment in the different phases of environment. So, in this we will look at sampling techniques and we will look at analytical techniques, we will also look at monitoring techniques for certain chemicals. But very importantly, one of the main components that we are going to be concentrating here is the issue of quality control, which is very important for monitoring environmental quality, because most of the environmental parameters that are subject to litigation and they are subject to challenge in court, and so therefore the responsibility lies with the analyst and in order to establish the accuracy and the validity of the results. So, that quality control or QA/QC is something that we will discuss in reasonable length. The third phase of the course, we talk about freight and transport of chemicals. So, in this context, freight and transport is a very vast subject. We will cover the fundamental aspects of this with reference to two things. One is intra-phase transport, which means we look at how chemical moves within a particular phase, for example, how it moves within water or within air, and we introduce what is called as a box model as a method in which we can model chemical concentrations for the purpose of risk assessment. So, essentially when we look at exposure, we are interested in finding out what is the concentration of a chemical in the environment in different phases of environment, and this is going to be the central quantity of interest even in the modeling, and we are trying to answer the question, is there an easy, a simple way of estimating this, and at least to set the stage for introducing us to the modeling of chemical transport in the environment. And we also will look at atmospheric dispersion models in its most fundamental form and introduce us to various factors that influence atmospheric dispersion. We also look at interface transport, which means this exchange of chemicals across different interfaces in the environment, such as the air-water interface, air-solid, which is mainly the soil interface, and water and solid, which is water and soil or sediment interface. So, these are the very important and large interfaces of chemical transport. And we look at different case studies, different cases, scenarios, not case studies, scenarios in which we can encounter these kind of transport problems and how we can model chemical concentrations, chemical transport, from assess a situation of risk based on estimating the chemical concentrations transfer across these kind of interfaces. The objectives of the course is to present an overall view of the multimedia environmental quality and freight and transport with reference to the interaction of pollutants with the environment. This is with a larger objective of doing environmental risk assessment. So, the estimation of the chemical environmental quality either by modeling or by measurement of both is central to the aspect of risk assessment, and therefore we will give you provide a holistic approach to the environmental pollution via measurement or modeling. So, who can take this course? Anybody who has a little bit of background prerequisite in basic engineering mathematics, energy and mass balance, basic thermodynamics, in short anybody who is currently a student of engineering or sciences in their third or fourth year, or any postgraduate student in the same disciplines, MTech, MSc, MS or PhD, and also environmental professionals with an engineering or science degree can use this course. And one of the objectives of this course is to provide a basis for which there are a lot of other advanced courses in this area that one can explore in order to get a more in-depth understanding of this course. Thank you very much.